Ramachandran coming up in the next hour. India to become the third largest economy in the world by 2030. S&P Global Ratings projects India's economy to grow to $7.3 trillion by 2030. Lok Sabha passes two bills on Jammu and Kashmir. India's Home Minister tears into opposition, says Pakistan would not have occupied a part of Kashmir had Jawaharlal Nehru not committed the historical blunders of declaring a ceasefire and taking the matter to the United Nations. India's Minister of State for Information Technology, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, says country is working on a comprehensive strategy to foster safety and trust in artificial intelligence. And former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson apologizes to families of COVID-19 victims at a public inquiry into his handling of the health crisis. S&P Global Ratings projects India to be the world's third largest economy by the year 2030. The US headquartered agency expects India to grow at 6.4% this fiscal and estimates that the growth will pick up to 7% by fiscal 2027. In contrast, it expects China's growth to slow to 4.6% by 2026 from an estimated 5.4% this year. The latest S&P Global Ratings forecast also says that India's growth will depend on its successful transition to a manufacturing-dominated economy from a services-dominated one.
S&P Global Ratings says in its latest forecast that India's economy will grow at 6.4% in the current financial year of 2023-24, before touching 6.9% in the next financial year. The S&P Global Ratings forecast, released on Tuesday, projects India's economy to grow to 7% in the financial year of 2026 and 27. It says that India will become the world's third largest economy by the year 2030. India is currently the world's fifth largest economy. S&P Global Ratings' forecast reads, and I quote, "We are seeing India's economic growth rate reach 7% in the financial year 26-27, unquote. It goes on to say, and I again quote, "We expect it to be the fastest growing economy in the next 3 years, unquote. S&P Global is the parent company of S&P Global Ratings. It's a US publicly traded corporation headquartered in the New York City. Its primary areas of business are financial information and analytics. Bureau Report, DD India.
Meanwhile, ratings agency Moody's slaps a downgrade warning on China's credit rating on Tuesday, saying that the costs to bail out local governments and state firms and control its property crisis would weigh on the world's #2 economy. Moody's lowered the outlook on China's A1 debt rating to negative from stable less than a month after it had done the same to the United States. Moody's also cited increased risks related to structurally and persistently lower medium-term economic growth and the ongoing downsizing of the property sector. Moody's also downgraded its outlook on Hong Kong to negative from stable. Moody's said the downgrade in Hong Kong's outlook reflects an assessment of tight political, institutional, economic and financial links between Hong Kong and China. The ratings agency separately lowered the outlook on Macau to negative from stable. Last month, Hong Kong's government revised down the full-year economic growth forecast to 3.2% from an earlier estimate of a 4 to 5% range. Right, moving on, speaking at the Global Technology Summit in New Delhi, India's Minister of State for Electronics and Information Technology, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, says the country is focused on the real-life usage of artificial intelligence.
AI is a is we are almost all into AI. We are very committed to AI. We have a program that we are launching, which will be the first global summit. We certainly are focused on using AI in real-life use cases, and our Prime Minister is absolutely a believer that technology can transform lives of people, make governments deliver more, deliver faster, deliver better. And so AI is going to be, for us, used to build models and build capabilities that are aimed at real-life use cases. AI will play a big role for us in terms of how we look at healthcare for the next decade, how we look at agriculture for the next decade, how we look at education and skilling for the next decade, how we look at security. So we are focused on real-life use cases that will impact communities, impact real people, and diffuse responsibility for safety and trust to making it legally accountable safety and trust on platforms. So we are moving significantly ahead. You know, there is a minor version of AI's challenges that we today deal with in terms of social media and the general toxicity on the internet. We are dealing with that, misinformation, deep fakes, in a manner which is consistent with these three guardrails and these three principles. We think legal accountability in law for platforms that are on the internet, which is a big departure from the safe harbor concept of Section 230 and Section 79 in the Indian Act, is the way of the future.
On the sidelines of the Global Technology Summit in New Delhi, DD India's correspondent spoke to Minister of State for External Affairs Meenakshi Lekhi on the role India globally could play in terms of technology and how the government plans to tackle the menace of deep fake. Take a listen.
At the Global Technology Summit, I'm joined by Minister of State for External Affairs Meenakshi Lekhi ji. Welcome to Doordarshan, ma'am. At the outset, I would like to ask you, how do you look at India's contribution to the world in terms of technology?
So India's contribution to the world in terms of technology has been immense. I don't want to get into the detail how Indian minds have been managing most of the cyberspace across boundaries. We have used cyberspace to bring that good governance model and bring a module to the world as to how India Stack Global can be a template for good governance, and more people join in, and other things like data protection, security by design, accessibility, all can be taken care of by this platform where 12 such projects are going on.
What is it that the government is willing to do to tackle these something like deepfakes?
So deepfake, cyber terrorism, using cyber technology for causing, for brainwashing people, causing fundamentalists or regime change, or non-state actors acting upon it. I mean, there are multitude of challenges and multitude of vulnerabilities. So right-thinking governments and right-thinking people need to come together to secure the technologies for the purpose for which these were made in the first place. And if these technologies are going to cause damage to the power structures of the states by non-state actors or rogue states, then we all need to cooperate and work together. The challenge, which is, say 99% of the global transactions are happening through undersea cables. Are we not going to protect it? Are we not going to protect supply chain mechanisms? Are we not going to work on biowarfare? So many vulnerabilities exist, and those vulnerabilities need to be worked at, including AI. And thus, rule of law, what we talk about in physical space, need to be operational on this also, so that the power wins it all cannot be the rule. The rule-based order is what we are looking at, not just in oceans, but also in cyberspace.
AI industry experts are also gathering in New York City today for the 8th Annual AI Summit to forecast the industry's trajectory. The summit, spanning 2 days, unites knowledge leaders, policymakers, and corporate executives for discourse and workshops. Amid a global push for tech regulation, it assumes much significance. DD India's Sally Patterson has more.
it's an opportunity to rub shoulders with some of the biggest names in AI. Representatives from technology companies, financial institutes and governments are set to hold talks and then stick around for networking afterwards. Tech giants including Microsoft, OpenAI and Google are all on the bill. Organisers say the summit, held on December 6th and 7th, will showcase how businesses are implementing and financing AI in a rapidly changing world. It comes just over a month after the UK held a major AI safety summit, looking at the risks of the economy and the industry. World leaders around the world are grappling with how to regulate it. In New York this week, the risks of AI will once again be in focus, tackling bias in technology, for example, but also opportunities for healthcare, finance, security, and more. Through speaker events, workshops, and feedback sessions, it's designed to be a very hands-on event. It promises to upskill employees through interactive and in-depth training sessions. And it is certainly an investment, with delegate tickets costing $2,400. Sally Patterson in New York, reporting for DD India.
Now, the European Union too has proposed an AI law to ensure consistent standards for AI systems across the EU member states. Lawmakers met on Wednesday to try to hammer out a deal on biometric surveillance and how to regulate systems such as ChatGPT. The Act sets out a number of requirements for AI systems, such as the need for them to be accurate, reliable, and transparent. The European Union is racing to approve the world's first comprehensive AI law after the issue took on greater urgency when the ChatGPT bot burst onto the scene last year. And Alex Carrier now joins us from Brussels for more on it. Alex, what more can you tell us about the talks between negotiators from the European Parliament and EU member states?
Well, they started just about an hour ago, and we expect that those talks will go in late into the night, maybe early into the morning. This is a very detailed, very technical, very difficult negotiation. We know the European Commission, that building behind me, proposed the AI Act, but three European member states, the three biggest economies in the European Union, France, Germany, Italy, all opposed the regulation or binding rules when it comes to foundation models. Foundation models are these vast data learning tools like ChatGPT, where you feed huge amounts of data into AI. And those three governments saying that regulating them would actually hinder EU AI champions and hinder the development of AI in the European Union. And so they oppose binding rules that the Commission has proposed, rather saying that codes of conduct and self-regulation would be better. Now, the Spanish presidency of the European Council, which is coordinating these negotiations, this between the European Parliament, Commission and Council, really wants to get a deal across before the end of the year. But these are very difficult, very technical negotiations. And of course, as you would imagine, being the first to regulate something is always very complicated.
All right, Alex, thank you so much. Alex Carrier reporting there from Brussels. In some more news on DD India News Hour, India's Minister of External Affairs, Subramaniam Jaishankar, met his Suriname counterpart, Albert R. Ramdeen, on Wednesday in New Delhi. Both sides sat down to hold delegation-level talks. Still to come on DD India News Hour. Former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson joins a public inquiry over his government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Healthcare workers strike work in Italy in protest over pension cuts. And Israeli army releases video showing its troops conducting aerial strikes on Hamas targets in Gaza.
What are you watching, Dad?
Don't you often say, think before investing in the stock market? So I'm trying to gain some knowledge.
From whom?
That's this stocks expert. Makes great educational videos. Gives good investment tips too.
Dad, don't rely on such videos. Do your own research or contact a SEBI-registered investment advisor. In the name of education, some influencers often misguide investors. You will have to bear the losses.
Do you know there's an investor protection fund for investors, IPF, but if your trade isn't executed on the exchange or if it's some guaranteed return scheme, then even IPF will not be able to help you.
And what if your broker becomes a defaulter? Then,
In that case, IPF can provide you with compensation.
where did you learn this?
NSE's website.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran. Going back to the top story, S&P Global Ratings publishes its latest forecast for India, says the country will become the third largest economy by the year 2030. And joining me is Dr. Arvind Virmani. Dr. Virmani is a member of the Niti Aayog and an economist as well. Dr. Virmani, welcome to DD India News Hour. Now, for the benefit of our viewers joining us from India and around the world who might not be familiar with the intricacies of the issues at hand here, may I begin by asking you to put the text of the S&P Global Ratings' latest forecast in its proper context for our viewers, please?
Yeah, so, the Indian economy has been growing faster than the average world growth and also faster than a majority of countries in the world. That is why we keep referring to it as the fastest large or major, fastest growing major economy in the world. So in the last few years, in the last 2-3 years, we have overtaken in terms of size of the economy, France and then UK. So this is a progressive increase in India's size relative to the other major economies. So this is the context. People have been speculating how quickly or how slowly we would overtake the next two largest economies, which are Germany and France. So that is the context in which this discussion is taking place.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Dr. Virmani. Now, the S&P Global Ratings' forecast for China is in sharp contrast to India's. Now, what does that tell you about the economic trajectory of the two Asian neighbors?
Right. So the the economy we obviously compare with, and when we say we will overtake Germany and Japan to become the third largest, the next largest is of course China. So one has been examining for many years. I mean, I have been doing these forecasts for 20-25 years.
Right.
And the interesting point from my point of view or our point of view has obviously been the size of the Indian economy relative to the Chinese economy. So basically what happened was that about 10 years ago or so, till about 10 years ago, China's economy was actually increasing relative to India's. So and that traces back 1-to-1 to China's growth rate being higher than India. Since then, it has fluctuated a bit, but has gradually gone below that of India. And so there was a little fluctuation. This is not a linear move, but now it is very clear that if we look forward from here onwards into the next 3 years, 5 years, or even further, China's growth rate is going to be lower than India's, and so we will be catching up in size. So closing the gap between the Chinese economy and the Indian economy.
Which brings me to my next question to you, Dr. Virmani, and this again is something that's engaging the attention of many of our viewers around the world. What is India or the Indian government doing right today?
Yeah. So what is the thing? So a little bit of history, depending
Sure.
on how much time you have.
Please go. Yeah, please carry on.
So of course everybody in the world is familiar with the 90s reforms, but very few people are familiar with the reforms which have happened since 2014.
Right.
So they started slowly in the sense of they didn't come. There was the GST reform, the IBC, the setting up of the Monetary Policy Committee, but then it accelerated from around September 2019. Just to remind our listeners, there was a major corporate tax reform in September 2019, which really surprised everybody. I am one of those who has been involved in tax reform for decades.
Indeed.
But the extent of that reform was a bit surprising for me. And then, of course, during the pandemic, a lot of people said, don't let there's an echo. There's a bit of an echo, sorry.
Apologies, we'll fix that link, Dr. Virmani, but do carry on, please.
Don't let a crisis. Yeah. So a lot of people said, don't let a crisis go to waste. So in fact, that's exactly what the government did. I was not in government, but there were a whole series of reforms there, product markets, factor markets, public sector, government expenditures, taxes. So systematically, from 2019 onwards, the government has gone and reformed those sectors which were unreformed in the 90s. So that's the important thing. This is something I tell investors who come to meet me, the long-term investors, is that there was a systematic effort. So government has not done it randomly.
Right.
They've gone, for example, just to mention one product reform, atomic energy was opened up. Earlier it was a monopoly of the government, but now private sector can participate in various elements. Obviously, they are not immediately going to build big atomic plants, but so similarly, space sector has been opened up, and you have seen already several companies are now developing rockets with different fuels. So like that, reform of labor laws, capital entrepreneurship, the emphasis on startups. So you go sector by sector, the expenditure reform, reforming the welfare system, and so on. So systematic reform of the economy. Now, the difficulty is that these things take time to get effective.
Indeed.
For example, the 19 reforms took 5 to 10 years to actually show up in the growth rate. So there's always a lag. The lag is never very 100%, like I cannot say for sure the lag will be 5 years, but we will begin to see the effects of these reforms over the next few years.
Absolutely. As you say, Dr. Virmani, New Delhi's macroeconomic policies have defied the naysayers and skeptics alike. But coming back to the latest forecast, the S&P Global Ratings' latest forecast comes with a caveat though. It says India's growth will depend on its successful transition to a manufacturing-dominated economy from a services-dominated one. Your thoughts?
Again, I think that is an extreme view. There are certain experts, like one of the former chief economic advisors, who says that we should not take any interest in manufacturing and we should just go for services. I do not agree with that.
Okay.
I think we have a golden and a last opportunity, to go for manufacturing. So that's what we are doing. Manufacturing, and basically it's connected with supply chains.
And finally, Dr. Virmani, very quickly, if you will, what's your wish list for India going forward? What would you like to see India or the government do in the near term to sustain, to build on the momentum and not slip up?
Yeah, so one of the important things, again, maybe it's my bias because I've done tax reform for so many years. We've done a lot of tax reform, but I think there is still enormous scope to simplify all the taxes, whether it's personal income tax, customs duties, GST, etc. And for some of these, I've worked out a roadmap also. Because one of the things you hear from, one has heard for 30 years, 50 years, that our tax system and the way it operates is too complicated for foreigners. I'm not talking about the general domestic. So that would be on top of my wish list. Yeah.
All right, on that note, Dr. Arvind Virmani, may I thank you once again for breaking it down for the benefit of our viewers tuning in from India and around the world. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated. All right, moving on to some other news we are tracking here on DD India News Hour. Former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is attending a public inquiry over his government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Johnson apologized for the loss of life in the pandemic while delivering the statement in the inquiry. The inquiry has already heard damaging testimonies about Johnson's handling of the crisis, and the former UK Prime Minister will now face 2 days of questioning as part of the official investigation into why Britain ended up with one of the highest death tolls globally during the pandemic.
That I understand the feelings of these victims and their families, and I am deeply sorry for the pain and the loss and the suffering of those victims.
And DD India's Ollie Barrett has more from London.
Boris Johnson is expected to use his appearance at the COVID-19 inquiry to apologise for mistakes that were made by his government in the handling of the pandemic. But we also expect him to mount a pretty robust defence of some of the government responses to the COVID-19 outbreak. For example, we expect that Boris Johnson will point to things like the rollout of vaccines in this country more quickly than was seen in many other parts of the world. But up to this point, the questioning of various witnesses has painted a sometimes chaotic and dysfunctional picture of the Downing Street operation that the former Prime Minister was running during the COVID pandemic. We expect some fairly robust questioning, for example, about the timing of lockdowns imposed by Boris Johnson's government. The former Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, when he spoke to the COVID inquiry, suggested that he believed that if the UK had locked down earlier, at the beginning and in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, then thousands of lives could have been saved. We also expect that Boris Johnson will be asked about Partygate, that row, those controversies about parties in and around Downing Street during periods of lockdown, which were so controversial when all of the details came out and led to the eventual downfall of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. We also expect Boris Johnson to deny allegations made by an aide during evidence to this inquiry that he was not focused on COVID-19 at the beginning of the pandemic because he was away writing a book on Shakespeare. This is very much expected to be the most high-profile moment of the COVID-19 inquiry so far. Boris Johnson will be questioned on Wednesday and then on Thursday. The inquiry was set up by his government to try and go through the preparation and the responses by the UK government to the COVID-19 pandemic and also learn lessons for the future. Ollie Barrett in London reporting for DD India.
And shifting focus from Western Europe now to Western Asia, the Israeli army released videos on Wednesday showing ground troops operating in Gaza and conducting aerial strikes on Hamas targets. This comes just a day after the military reached the heart of the southern Gaza town of Khan Yunis. The footage shows soldiers engaged in combat in residential areas, armored vehicles and tanks firing ammunition. A video filmed inside a classroom showed soldiers revealing what the Israeli army says was an explosive device that was placed inside a school.
As the IDF expands its operations to dismantle Hamas in Gaza, we have not lost sight, not for one moment, of our critical mission to rescue our hostages, to do everything in our power to bring our hostages home. This is an urgent call for action. The international community must take action. The Red Cross must have access to the hostages that are in the hands of Hamas. 138 hostages, children, women, men, the elderly, have been in Hamas captivity for over 60 days, in brutal and inhumane conditions. Every day, every hour, every minute is critical.
As Israeli Defense Forces march on with their Gaza operations, the army spokesperson called on the international community to take urgent action to help free the hostages. He added that every minute of hostage captivity endangered their lives. Right, moving on, and some more news from Israel. Israeli forces stormed southern Gaza's main city, Khan Yunis, on Tuesday in what they call the most intense day of combat in 5 weeks of ground operations against Hamas terrorists. DD India's Sarah Coates gives us more details on the situation on the ground.
Hi there, Tanvi. Well, look, according to the military, heavy hand-to-hand fighting is continuing deep inside Khan Yunis. This is the biggest southern city in the Gaza Strip, and before this war began, it was home to around 450,000 people. Now, the military says that over the last 24 hours, it's killed at least 4 senior Hamas commanders and also hit around 250 Hamas targets. These include weapons storage facilities and other ammunition stashes. Now, according to other reports, this is unconfirmed at this hour, of course, by the military, that IDF troops have also surrounded the home, which is in Khan Yunis, of the head of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Yahya Sinwar, although he is not believed to be home right now, believed to be potentially hiding in one of these underground tunnels, with the military continuing to say that he is a dead man walking. Today, the number of people that are being held in the Gaza Strip by Hamas has been revised. It was 137. It's now gone up to 138. And what we do need to remember is these people have been held there now for more than 2 months. There's no information on their welfare, their whereabouts, and they have had not a single visit from the International Red Cross. Now, somebody just spoke out on Army radio with a report saying that it may be at least a month before there's enough pressure, military pressure, on Hamas to be able to get some sort of a truce window to get these people out. And there was yesterday a war cabinet meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, and also a number of these families, and also recently released hostages. And they say that Netanyahu said, no, not right now. I don't think we can get these people out at this stage. And that is drawing a lot of anger, a lot of condemnation. People calling on him to step down, saying that if you can't even run a war cabinet meeting, then how can you run a country? So certainly very, very concerning, given the amount of people still being held there, and also these reports coming in that Israel is potentially considering flooding these tunnels that run right underneath the Gaza Strip with seawater to flush out Hamas operatives. But these families say it may in fact kill their loved ones instead.
And in more news from the region, President Vladimir Putin of Russia visited Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. Putin visited the UAE and will visit Saudi Arabia in a rare trip abroad. Putin held talks with United Arab Emirates' President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. They met this year at the Russian Davos, an economic forum in St. Petersburg. The Russian president will be holding also talks with Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Riyadh to discuss oil, OPEC Plus, and the conflicts between Israel and Hamas and Russia and Ukraine. Now take a look at some more stories making news around the world. Doctors, nurses and healthcare executives in Italy staged a nationwide 24-hour strike on Tuesday in protest against pension cuts and other government measures. At a square in the heart of Italy's capital, Rome, doctors and nurses gathered with a list of demands regarding the government's 2024 budget. A woman had a lucky escape after a speeding car smashed into a shop but missed her by mere inches in Peru. The vehicle demolished the electric pole outside the shop, but miraculously, the woman escaped unscathed. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was challenged in Parliament on Wednesday over a new treaty signed with Rwanda to deport asylum seekers to the East African country. Opposition leader Keir Starmer dismissed the government's latest plan, saying the deal would allow the UK to fund accommodation and living expenses for migrants deported to Rwanda. A robot that uses powerful magnets to perform less invasive and more efficient surgeries completed its first international procedure, a gallbladder removal at a public hospital in Chile. The system also gives the surgeon control of the camera, which allows for better visualization, which is much more stable. And still to come on DD India News Hour. The Lok Sabha passes 2 bills on Jammu and Kashmir. US President Joe Biden says his motivation to run for a second term in 2024 is to prevent Donald Trump from returning as president. And Indian Railways completes maiden trial of an electric train in Jammu and Kashmir.
We just don't bring you the news as it unfolds. We get to the heart of the matter.
We don't just present facts. We demystify complex social, political, and economic events.
We break stories that shape the world's present and future because you deserve the truth.
I am Tanvi Taneja from New Delhi.
I'm Ollie Barrett from London.
I'm Nick Harper from Washington, D.C.
Join us on DD India Global Monday to Friday at these times.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran. A quick recap of the headlines. India to become the 3rd largest economy in the world by 2030. S&P Global Ratings projects India's economy to grow to $7.3 trillion by 2030. The Lok Sabha passes 2 bills on Jammu and Kashmir. India's Home Minister tears into opposition, says Pakistan would not have occupied a part of Kashmir had Jawaharlal Nehru not committed the historical blunders of declaring a ceasefire and taking the matter to the United Nations. And India's Minister of State for Information Technology, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, says country is working on a comprehensive strategy to foster safety and trust in artificial intelligence. India's lower house on Wednesday, in continuation to yesterday's discussion, debated the Jammu and Kashmir Reservation Amendment Bill 2023 and the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Amendment Bill 2023 on the 3rd day of the ongoing winter session of Parliament. After a statement by the Home Minister Amit Shah, both bills were passed by the lower house via voice vote.
In a significant legislative development, India's Lok Sabha, the lower house, has passed 2 crucial bills amending key laws in the Northern Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. The Jammu and Kashmir Reservation Bill 2023 and the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Bill 2023 were introduced in Parliament in July this year. Home Minister Amit Shah asserted that these bills would bring justice to those neglected for 70 years.
मैं जो बिल लेकर आया हूं, जो विधेयक लेकर इस महान सदन की सहमति प्राप्त करने के लिए मैं खड़ा हुआ हूं, वो बिल 70 सालों से जिन्हों को अन्याय हुआ है, जो अपमानित हुए और जिनकी अनदेखी की गई है, वो सभी लोगों को न्याय दिलाने का बिल है.
The Jammu and Kashmir Reservation Amendment Bill 2023 modifies the Reservation Act of 2004, replacing weak and underprivileged classes with other backward classes.
हमें पिछड़ा वर्ग के लोगों के प्रति जरा भी संवेदना है तो नाम के साथ उनका सम्मान जुड़ा है, वो जरूर देगा.
On the other hand, Jammu and Kashmir Reorganisation Amendment Bill 2023 amends the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganisation Act 2019, which felicitated the reorganisation of the then state into the Union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh.
जम्मू में पहले 37 सीटें थी, अब 43 हुई है, 43 हुई है। कश्मीर में पहले 46 थी, अब 47 हुई है और पाक ऑक्यूपाई कश्मीर की 24 सीटें, क्योंकि वो हमारा है, हमने रिजर्व रखा।
These two bills that aim to change the landscape of Jammu and Kashmir were passed by voice vote after more than 6 hours of debate spanning over 2 days.
To the next chair of the BBC. The TV executive will take over the British broadcaster, facing a series of controversies and funding challenges. DD India's Ollie Barrett reports from London.
Samir Shah has been named as the preferred choice for BBC chair of the UK government. The Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser, who is the minister who leads this, has described him as having a wealth of experience to take on the role. The BBC is politically independent, but its chairperson is chosen by the UK government. It's not quite settled yet, though. This choice has to go to the Department for Culture and Media Select Committee in Westminster, which is a committee of MPs who will scrutinise this. If they also approve of the government's choice, it will then go to the King for final symbolic sign-off. Now, 71-year-old Samir Shah is a journalist. He has held a number of roles at the BBC before, but currently is the chief executive of an independent television production company. The role of BBC chair requires that individual to try and safeguard the BBC's independence, but also its mission to inform and educate. And the chair would also lead the negotiations with the government about the licence fee, which is the main funding mechanism for the organisation. The BBC is currently in the middle of trying to save hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of a funding freeze and the high cost of inflation. And the BBC has also seen a series of controversies recently. The last chairperson, who was permanent chair at the BBC, had to resign, Richard Sharp. He had to resign after scrutiny over his contacts and dealings with the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson before taking on the role. Samir Shah was born in India in 1952 and moved to the UK in 1960. Ollie Barrett in London, reporting for DD India.
Former US President Donald Trump, who is also the Republican frontrunner for the 2024 election, has said that President Joe Biden is not fit to run for office. In a town hall interview, Trump, besides saying that he will not abuse power if he comes back to office, also said that Biden is in a bad shape physically to contest the upcoming polls.
He is number one from your standpoint, cognitively. You like to use that word, cognitively. He's not good. I personally don't think he makes it, okay? I haven't said that. I'm saving it for this big town hall.
Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden has said that part of his motivation to run for a second term in 2024 is to prevent Donald Trump from returning as president.
I expect so, but look, he is running, and I have to run.
Moving on, Saudi Arabia has asked the United States to show restraint in responding to attacks by Yemen's Houthis against ships in the Red Sea, as Riyadh seeks to contain spillover from the Hamas-Israel war. The Iran-aligned Houthis have gotten into the conflict that has spread around the Middle East since the 7th of October, attacking vessels in vital shipping lanes and firing drones and missiles at Israel. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley will face off at the 4th Republican presidential debate in a few hours from now, with Donald Trump up by more than 40 percentage points in most opinion polls. Trump said that he will not become a dictator if he becomes U.S. president again, except on day one. The German government faces around $65 billion hole in its finances after the country's constitutional court ruled on 15th November the reallocation of unused emergency funds from the Pandemic on Climate Initiative as unconstitutional. To suspend the debt brake, the government can declare an emergency situation and Parliament has to agree to it. With a coalition meeting underway on Wednesday, the only solution to the conundrum lies in an agreement among all parties. Take a look now at some other stories making news in India. In India's Jammu and Kashmir, Northern Railways orchestrated a successful maiden trial of an electric train covering the inaugural 15 kilometers from Banihal railway station to Khari station in Ramban district. A sizable local crowd gathered at Khari railway station to extend a warm welcome to this pioneering train. Indian Navy personnel on Wednesday helped people evacuate from inundated areas in Pallikaranai and Thoraipakkam in Chennai in the Indian state of Tamil Nadu using inflatable boats. About 150 people, including elderly, pregnant women and children, were safely evacuated. The Viksit Bharat Sankalp Yatra, aimed at disseminating information about various central government schemes, has reached India's northern state of Uttarakhand, where a large number of beneficiaries of the schemes actively participated and shared their experiences. And still to come on DD India News Hour. A Hong Kong-based research lab tries to revolutionize fashion industry by creating AI-generated clothes. Lionel Messi becomes the first men's football player to be named the Time Athlete of the Year. And Indian dance form Garba included in UNESCO's representative list of intangible cultural heritage.
What are you watching, Dad?
Don't you often say, think before investing in the stock market? So I'm trying to gain some knowledge.
From whom?
That's this stocks expert. Makes great educational videos, gives good investment tips too.
Dad, don't rely on such videos. Do your own research or contact a SEBI-registered investment advisor. In the name of education, some influencers often misguide investors. You will have to bear the losses.
Soch kar, samajh kar, invest kar.
Do you know there's an investor protection fund for investors, IPF, but if your trade isn't executed on the exchange or if it's some guaranteed return scheme, then even IPF will not be able to help you.
And what if your broker becomes a defaulter then?
In that case, IPF can provide you with compensation.
Where did you learn this?
NSE's website.
Soch kar, samajh kar, invest kar.
You're watching DD India News Hour. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran. And now to all the news from the world of sport. Argentina captain Lionel Messi becomes the first men's football player to be named Time Athlete of the Year after winning the Ballon d'Or for a record-extending 8th time and elevating the profile of the sport in the US with his move to Inter Miami. Messi has made history by becoming the first male soccer player to be named the Athlete of the Year by Time magazine.
Soccer's living legend Lionel Messi has bagged yet another accolade in the world of football. The 36-year-old has been named Time magazine's Athlete of the Year for 2023 after his move to the United States to join the Major League Soccer side Inter Miami. Time wrote, Messi managed to do what once seemed impossible, turning the US into a soccer country. Messi made his debut for the Florida-based franchise in July and announced his arrival by scoring a free kick in the final minutes to give his side a 2-1 victory. Since then, he has had a profound impact on the MLS. With the stars signing on board, Inter Miami won the League Cup, their first major trophy, beating Nashville in the final in which Messi scored. The Argentine international star scored 11 goals in 14 games in all competitions to finish the season. He was also nominated for the MLS MPV award. In October, Messi claimed a record, extending 8th Ballon d'Or crown after he played a key role in guiding Argentina to their first World Cup title in 36 years. When they beat defending champions France in the final in December 2022 in Qatar. The 36-year-old had no shortage of offers when he left Paris Saint-Germain earlier this year, choosing to sign for Major League Soccer's Inter Miami despite being linked with his former team Barcelona and a big money move to Saudi side Al Hilal. Ultimately, he ended up signing Inter Miami in a deal reported to be $20 million a year, and also an ownership stake in the club when he retires. Messi told Time, "The truth is that fortunately, I had several options on the table that were interesting, and I had to analyze them and think, even weigh them up with my family before making the final decision to come to Miami." Simone Biles, LeBron James, and the United States women's soccer team have won the award in recent years, with Aaron Judge of the New York Yankees winning it in 2022.
A Hong Kong-based research lab is trying to revolutionize the fashion industry by creating AI-generated clothes. Anu Kaushik reports.
Imagine a world where you could change the color of your clothes by making a simple hand gesture. This is what happened at the Milan Fashion Week, where models donned clothes made of a glowing fabric which combines yarn with polymeric optical fibers. The material has been developed by AidLab, which is a research platform established by the Hong Kong Polytechnic University and UK's Royal College of Art. It focuses on the integration of artificial intelligence and design.
The POFs are actually transmitters of light. So light travels from one point to the other. So with the light traveling from one point to the other, the usual POFs, you'll find that light is only emitted at the tips. But for us, we actually do a surface treatment so that the light actually also travels through the lateral side of the fabric.
The fabric contains an integrated camera which uses AI algorithms to generate colored illuminations. It can also be controlled by mobiles and remote. People can even project photos from their phones onto the fabric. The textile has created waves across the fashion world, but its makers feel that the multi-sensory technology behind it can also help the medical industry.
Multisensory stimulation is something that is very common for, it's a form of well-being for a lot of people with dementia, people with learning challenges. So it actually encourages their well-being and gives them a sense of calm, and also a very easy way for them to have engagement and direct response.
Researchers also underscore the textile's sustainability benefits and say that it could reduce clothing waste. Anu Kaushik for DD India.
The western Indian state of Gujarat's Garba dance form achieves a momentous milestone by securing a position on UNESCO's representative list of intangible cultural heritage. Now, Garba is a cultural tradition embodying a celebration, devotion, gender inclusivity, and social equality. It transcends borders. Now, becoming India's 15th element to receive such distinguished acknowledgement, Garba presents India's abundant cultural, traditional, and heritage treasures to the global stage. Take a look.
Garba has gone global. The dance form, which originates from India's western state of Gujarat, is now part of UNESCO's representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity. Garba is a devotional dance which is performed at all joyous occasions. The decision to include it in UNESCO's representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity was taken during the 18th Intergovernmental Committee meet in Botswana. Garba is the 15th ICH element from India to become part of the list. Durga Puja, Kumbh Mela, Chow Dance, Kalbelia and more have already become part of this ICH list. Garba has devotional and ritualistic roots. It's specially performed during Navratri, a 9-day Hindu festival worshipping goddess Durga or Shakti. Several member states congratulated India on this achievement. To mark the occasion, a troupe of dancers from the Indian Council for Cultural Relations showcased the dance form at the meeting venue. And in India, the Gujarat government is now organizing several Garba events in different districts to celebrate this milestone. Tanvi Taneja for DD India.
And India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi hailed the recognition of Garba dance as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage. In a post on social media platform X, he said, and I quote, "Garba is a celebration of life, unity and our deep-rooted traditions. Its inscription on the intangible heritage list showcases to the world the beauty of Indian culture. This honor inspires us to preserve and promote our heritage for future generations. Congrats for this global acknowledgement," unquote. And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of DD India News Hour. Let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook, X and Instagram. You can also check out our website, ddindia.co.in. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran. From all of us here in New Delhi, thanks for watching DD India News Hour.